Welcome back to Klepper's Corner. Today in history. April 10th is one of those dates that feels like history accidentally left every genre in the same folder. You have ancient Rome importing a goddess during wartime like a desperate spiritual free agent signing. Emperors panicking at comets. Volcanoes changing the weather of the entire planet. Peace deals hammered out by sleep-deprived negotiators. And Paul McCartney ending the Beatles with the emotional warmth of an office memo. It is a date that keeps asking the same question over and over. When people are scared, ambitious, exhausted, or very, very convinced they understand the universe, what kind of mess do they make next? Segment 1. Omens, gods, and other government programs. The Romans celebrated the climax of the Megalesia on April 10th because nothing says stable Republican governance like importing a foreign mountain goddess in the middle of a war, and then pretending her ecstatic cult can be managed with proper seating arrangements. Hannibal is out there dismantling Roman confidence, and the Senate's answer is basically, we need divine help, but make it bureaucratic. So Sabella arrives in Rome with all the wild Phrygian energy of drums, dancing, and priests the Roman elite found deeply alarming. And the Romans do what Rome always did with chaos. They legalized it, staged it, and put wealthy families in charge of the catering. It is one of history's great ironies that a culture obsessed with discipline survived in part by honoring a goddess whose whole vibe was ecstatic unpredictability. And then, centuries later, on April 10th, 837, Halley's Comet makes its closest recorded approach to Earth, and medieval rulers look up at the sky the way modern people look at a group text from their boss that just says, "We need to talk." Emperor Louis the Pious sees the comet and immediately assumes the universe is subtweeting him personally. Same comet, different century, and William the Conqueror will later read it as divine approval, while others read doom, death, and collapse. So whether it was a black meteorite in Rome or a flaming streak across the heavens, April 10th keeps proving that humans have always treated the cosmos like an unstable customer service department, desperately searching the sky for confirmation of whatever they were already afraid of. Segment 2. The Marketplace of Betrayal. On April 10th, 1500, Ludovico Sforza is captured at Novara after the Swiss mercenaries on both sides decide they are not especially interested in murdering fellow Swiss people for the branding exercise known as Renaissance Italian politics. This is an incredible failure for a ruler whose own family built power through mercenary opportunism. The Sforzas basically rode hired muscle to nobility, and then Ludovico lost everything because hired muscle suddenly discovered ethics, or at least a scheduling conflict. Machiavelli would later stare at this fiasco and come away with the timeless political lesson that if your entire military system depends on men who invoice by the hour, your reign may have some structural weaknesses. Then, on April 10th, 1545, the Spanish formally found Potosi at the foot of Cerro Rico, after the mountain all but slaps them in the face with silver. Diego de Hualpa discovers the ore. The Spaniards initially refuse to believe it, and then only accept reality after getting physically knocked down by the same brutal mountain wind. That is history at its most literal. Colonial greed needing to be shoved into the dirt before it notices a fortune. Potosi becomes one of the great engines of global capitalism, which is a polished way of saying a mountain in Bolivia was forced to bleed silver so empires, wars, and financial systems elsewhere could act like this was all very civilized. Ludovico's Milan and Imperial Potosi are linked by the same ugly truth. Power loves calling itself destiny right up until the bill arrives. And on April 10th, the bill is usually delivered by betrayal, weather, or a man holding a suspiciously dense rock. Segment 3. Nature does not care about your schedule. If April 10th teaches humility anywhere, it is in the category of humans confidently building plans while the physical universe quietly sharpens a knife. On the evening of April 10, 1815, Mount Tambora explodes with such force that it does not just devastate Sumbawa. It essentially reaches into the climate controls of the entire planet and sets humanity to miserable. Villages vanish, tsunamis crash, ash darkens the sky, and soon the world gets the year without a summer. Because apparently one volcano in Indonesia can ruin agriculture in Ireland, China, and New England, while also indirectly helping inspire Frankenstein. That may be the most April 10th sentence imaginable. A mountain explodes, crops fail globally, economies wobble, disease spreads, and Mary Shelley gets trapped indoors long enough to invent one of literature's greatest meditations on scientific hubris. Nature did not merely interrupt history there, it edited it. And on April 10, 1912, Titanic leaves Southampton on its maiden voyage and nearly gets sideswiped before it has even had time to become a metaphor. The ship is so absurdly huge that its movement through the harbor creates a suction effect that yanks the SS New York loose from its moorings. Imagine unveiling the greatest engineering marvel of the age and almost wrecking it in the parking lot. The horrifying irony, of course, is that if that collision had actually happened, the voyage would have been delayed or canceled, and more than 1,500 people later lost in the Atlantic might have lived. Tambora and Titanic are wildly different stories, but both expose the same human delusion. We build systems, schedules, and machines believing scale equals control, and then the universe says, that is adorable. Segment 4. Empire, Industry, and the Arithmetic of Cruelty. On April 10, 1868, Emperor Tewodros II's forces are crushed at Arogi by a British expedition equipped with modern rifles and artillery. And the casualty disparity is so grotesque it barely reads like a battle. It reads like the industrial future arriving with a ledger. Ethiopian warriors charge with courage, and courage meets the cold accounting power of imperial logistics, breech-loading rifles, and artillery dragged across mountains by an empire that could move machines farther than many states could move food. It is one of those moments when modern warfare stops pretending bravery is enough and starts demonstrating that empires now kill at scale with terrifying efficiency. Then, on April 10, 1942, the Bataan Death March begins, and the arithmetic of cruelty becomes even more intimate. Starving American and Filipino prisoners are forced to march through brutal heat, denied water, beaten, bayoneted, and executed for failing to maintain the pace of men who were already half dead. What makes Bataan so horrifying is not just the number of victims, but the deliberate weaponization of vulnerability. These men had already endured siege, disease, and hunger. Their captors simply converted suffering into policy. And yet, in both Abyssinia and Bataan, amid the machinery of domination, there is still that stubborn human refusal to disappear quietly. Tewodros's forces fight, knowing the odds are absurd. Prisoners at Bataan carry each other, even when doing so risks death. History loves to celebrate victors, because victors leave paperwork, statues, and memoirs. But April 10th keeps reminding us that a lot of the real moral weight sits with the people who were overpowered, outgunned, starved, marched, shelled, and still somehow found ways to remain human while empires behaved like accounting departments with bayonets. Segment 5. Endings, liberations, and the strange bureaucracy of memory. On April 10, 1945, as Buchenwald teeters between Nazi collapse and liberation, the camp's underground resistance moves to obstruct evacuation and seize control before the SS can turn the final days of the war into one last extermination project. That matters because the liberation of Buchenwald is not just a story of Allied arrival. It is also a story of prisoners refusing to wait passively for history to rescue them. When American forces arrive, they encounter not only evidence of atrocity, but survivors who have already begun the terrifying work of reclaiming order from engineered barbarism. And in one of history's most chilling ironies, even in the shadow of the camp, Cold War suspicion is already peeking around the corner, because the underground leadership includes committed communists. And apparently, no historical moment is too morally clarifying for politics to remain tacky. Then, on April 10th, 1970, Paul McCartney effectively tells the world the Beatles are over through a promotional Q&A for his solo album, which may be the most passive-aggressive way to end the 1960s imaginable. Not a grand farewell concert, not a shared statement, just a printed document saying, in essence, I'm having a better time with my family. The Beatles had provided a soundtrack for youthful idealism, experimentation, and collective cultural momentum. And their breakup lands like a notice that even utopias eventually get handed to legal teams. Buchenwald and the Beatles do not belong in the same emotional register, obviously. But April 10th connects them through the idea of endings that reveal what was underneath all along. One exposes the industrial evil polite societies allowed to happen. The other exposes how even the brightest cultural phenomenon can dissolve into contracts, resentment, and brand management. Whether it is a death camp being documented or the biggest band in the world collapsing the press kit, endings have a way of stripping off the myth and leaving the paperwork. Segment 6, images that changed what people thought was possible. On April 10th, 1925, The Great Gatsby is published, and America largely responds with a shrug, which feels on brand for a country that often mistakes glitter for depth and then acts surprised when someone writes a novel about exactly that. Fitzgerald had written this exquisite autopsy of longing, class, performance, and self-invention, and the public basically said, "We were hoping for more Party." That rejection is almost too perfect. A novel about the emptiness of glamour initially fails because readers wanted more glamorous emptiness. Then, on April 10th, 1998, the Good Friday Agreement is signed after nearly 2 years of negotiations and one last sleepless push through the night, proving that sometimes the most world-changing images are not explosions or crowds, but exhausted adults refusing to leave the room until they stop ruining each other's future. It is one of modern history's rare masterpieces of political realism, built not on fantasy, but on the deeply unsexy labor of compromise, ambiguity, and accepting that peace often sounds less like triumph and more like everyone finally being too tired to keep reenacting their grandparents' trauma. In 2010, Poland loses President Lech Kaczynski and much of its national leadership in the Smolensk plane crash while traveling to commemorate the Katyn massacre. A historical echo so dark it barely seems narratable without sounding invented. And then in 2019, astronomers released the first image of a black hole, a glowing ring around a void, stitched together from hard drives physically flown around the world, because even the most advanced science occasionally depends on what is basically cosmic FedEx. That image mattered because it showed humanity can still do something magnificent, cooperate across borders, trust math, build instruments at planetary scale, and look directly at the invisible. April 10th gives us novels that were misunderstood, peace that was painfully negotiated, tragedies that reopened old wounds, and a black hole made visible at last. It is a date that keeps asking whether human beings will choose illusion, destruction, memory, or understanding. Usually, being us, we choose all four. In conclusion, April 10th is a date where processions, comets, mercenaries, silver mountains, volcanoes, prison camps, peace treaties, rock bands, and black holes all end up in the same historical scrapbook. Which is absurd, until you realize the common thread is not the event itself, but the human response. Panic, greed, faith, invention, cruelty, resilience, compromise, ego, and wonder keep repeating in different costumes. History does not move in a straight line on a day like this. It lurches, dazzles, erupts, negotiates, collapses, and occasionally learns something.